In this video, we will learn the basics on how to correctly use a drill, specifically for driving screws. This may seem too basic for some of you, but for others this can be important information. I've seen many people use a drill incorrectly, resulting in stripped screws, damaged bits, and lots of frustration. First, let's start with some basic terminology. This is a drill bit, or rather technically it's a drill. This is a driver bit. This is a drill driver. And this is an impact driver. Using the drill driver, you turn the drill to drill holes. Using the impact driver, you turn the driver bit to drive screws. This is an important difference to remember for later. Let's go over the basic workings of the drill driver. On the side, we have a button. This changes the drill direction from forward to reverse, or locks the trigger if you leave it in the middle. On top we have a switch that changes the speed of the drill. 1 is slower and 2 is faster, but 1 also gives you more torque or spinning force to drive larger screws. This rotating collar here controls the clutch. You can see the numbers get smaller as I rotate it to the right. At the smallest number, 2, you can stop the drill super easily with 2 fingers. This is for drilling small screws into very delicate materials so that you don't accidentally drill too hard and damage the wood. You can see as we turn the collar up, it becomes harder and harder to stop the drill. If you turn the collar all the way, we have a little symbol that looks like a drill bit. This turns off the clutch feature completely so that you're drilling directly into the screw. And finally, this drill has a hammer feature, which vibrates for drilling into stone, but not all drills will have that. To insert the drill bit, we need to loosen the chuck. The chuck are these 3 arms that hold the bit in place. This by hand by rotating this part, or to speed things up, just hold down, put the drill in reverse, and spin. To tighten it, put the drill back into forward and press the trigger again. When putting the bit in, you have to hold it right in the middle, or else the chuck could grab onto it unevenly and the bit will be crooked. Give it a final tighten at the end to make sure the bit doesn't fall out. With the bit in, you can now use the drill driver to drill holes. The rest of this video will mostly be about driving screws. You can learn more about drilling holes in the handle installation video. This here is the impact driver. This particular unit has an electronic speed control, though many will not and will just be 1 speed. Just like on the drill driver, we have the forward, reverse, and lock button in the middle. Inserting the bit is much easier on the impact driver. Just press it in place and it clicks and locks in. To release it, pull out on this collar and the bit will fall out. It's important to understand that there is a fundamental difference between the drill driver and the impact driver. The drill applies an even, steady rotational pressure. This is what you need to cut through the wood when drilling a hole. Think about it as turning a wrench. You press hard on the wrench on one end, which causes it to rotate evenly. The impact driver, on the other hand, works very differently. You can hear that it is very loud and has a lot of vibration while driving the bit. This is because, rather than applying the pressure evenly, it applies it in short, hard bursts. Going back to the wrench example, you can think of it as hitting the wrench along, rather than pushing on it evenly. If you've ever tried to change a flat tire and had one of the lug nuts get stuck, you may have kicked or hammered the wrench out of frustration to break the nut loose. This is what the impact driver is doing, but many times every second. This may seem overly technical, but it's good information to remember for later. Next, let's talk driver bits. First, we have the Phillips. This is the one that looks like a plus or a star. Then we have Robertson, which is the square one. Almost all the screws we'll be using will be one of these 2. The size of the bit is important. The Phillips you see here is a number 2, which is most common. This here is a number 1, and this is a number 3. The Robertson here is also a number 2, again the most common. Here is a number 1. While there are many other sizes, you likely won't encounter any other ones. There's also something called a Torx bit, which we do see sometimes, which is the 6-sided star. This comes in many sizes as well. Starting just a couple years ago, Torx have been getting a lot more popular, but for now, the vast majority of bits we will use is a number 2 Phillips, a number 1 Robertson, and a number 2 Robertson. Let's now talk about the main problem beginners face when driving screws. It's called cam out. This is when the bit slips out of its place rather than driving the screw. It strips the screw, wears out the bit, wastes time, and causes a lot of frustration. Here are 5 tips to avoid cam out and stripping screws. Number 1. Use the right drill. If you remember earlier, I said that the drill driver was for drilling holes and the impact driver was for driving screws. While it is true that they can be used interchangeably, the impact driver does work much better for driving screws without stripping them. Although this may not seem intuitive, due to the jerky, hammering motion by which it turns the screw, impact drivers are far less susceptible to cam out than the steady turning drill driver counterparts. Something about that hammering motion causes the driver bit to almost lock in place, whereas the steady increasing pressure of the drill driver causes the bit to raise up and out of the screw head, especially with Phillips, as you can see here in slow motion. Number 2. Use the right driver bit. We've already talked about the different bits. Using the right bit is super important, as using the wrong one not only won't work, but it can also strip the screw, making it impossible to remove and damage the bit. Using the wrong size is a surprisingly easy mistake for beginners to make. As I said before, the most common size for both Phillips and Robertson is the number 2. You can see here that the correct size bit fits snugly with no gaps or wiggling. But when we put the incorrect size, a number 1 in this example, there's a gap and it wobbles and it strips really easily. Try to use a size too big, such as the number 3, and it won't even go in at all. The same applies for Robertson. This number 2 fits perfectly in its hole. But when I try to put a number 1 bit in, there's a lot of wobble and extra wiggle room, so it strips. This may seem too obvious, but I have seen people use a Phillips bit in a Robertson screw, especially if the screw is around a corner or under a counter and hard to see. You can hear the awful noise it makes. Make sure to check a screw if you can't see it directly. Here we have a tiny screw for a number 1 Robertson. These are sometimes used to screw hinges on. Only the number 1 bit will fit in here, so you can't really mess that one up. We don't really use the number 1 Phillips bits, as those are only used for electronics. Even the tiny screws used to secure the hinges still use a number 2 Phillips. Number 3. Line everything up straight. Once you have the right drill and the right bit, it's all up to technique. The most common error is to not line up the drill correctly. Imagine a line starting at the tip of the screw, going through the drill bit, and then through the length of the drill itself, and even all the way through your arm if your position allows you to get directly in front of the drill. The trick is to keep this imaginary line completely straight at all times. Where the end of the drill bit meets the screw head, there is a hinge point. You don't want this to be on an angle. Let's watch that again. You can see that because everything was lined up perfectly straight, there was no stripping or cam out. Let's go back to this clip of me brutalizing this screw. If you look at my bit, you can see that it's slipping out of the screw head every time it tilts to the side. This principle works the exact same way even when you are screwing on an angle. Because I kept my imaginary line completely straight, the screw was driven in without any problems. Number 4. Apply the right amount of pressure. The next bit of technique you need to know is to apply enough pressure. This is especially true with Phillips. Here you can see what happens when you only rely on the weight of the drill to press the screw downward. The bit slips right out. However, if you press hard into the drill, it will go straight in without a problem. The denser the substrate you're screwing into, the harder you will need to push to prevent cam out. For example, with a soft material such as melamine, you will not need to push very hard. But in my example, which was pressure-treated lumber, I had to push quite hard. Also, keep in mind that the harder you have to push, the more important the previous point about angle will be. The final tip is, take care of your bits. Worn bits will cam out easier, and camming out will cause your bit to wear quicker. Therefore, using a worn bit to begin with will cause exponential problems for you. Here we have an old number 1 Robertson on the right and a new one on the left. You can see very clearly that the old one is a lot rounder and less sharp than the new one. I'm sure you can imagine which bit will be easier to work with. One bad practice I see that accelerates bit wear is that people in a hurry will pull the drill bit off of the screw before it has stopped spinning. Rather, you should let the drill stop spinning, then take it off the screw. The same goes for the other way around. Don't try to put the drill bit in the screw while it is spinning. These things may seem obvious on paper, but when you're in a rush on the job site, it's surprisingly easy to do. Also, stop immediately if you hear this sound. Don't try and stubbornly keep on going, as there's obviously a problem. Fix whatever it is and then keep going. Good habits will help bits last longer. The Phillips on the left has been used for over a year, but aside from the discoloration, it still looks hardly worn compared to the new one. In conclusion, with the right tools, knowledge, and techniques, you can soon be driving screws all day long at multiple different angles without any stripping or frustration.